Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about how I made my Railway series style version of James. Originally I was going to make a video talking about how I made all the main characters from number 2 to 10 in Railway series style, but that just turned out to be way too long of a video for me to edit, so I'm going to do them all individually as separate videos. I had such a blast making all of these characters. It felt like one really big project, even though they were all individual characters. And it's really great now that I have all the main characters in a consistent style and my own sort of unique style in some ways. So yeah, I'm really pleased to show them to you and kind of share how I made them all. Today we'll talk about James, and as you may know, he was the first one that I made and I ended up remaking him, so we'll talk a little bit about why I decided to change how I did him originally. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about why it took me so long to make Railway series styled engines in the first place.
A lot of you might be thinking, why didn't I make these sooner? My customs and remakes have always been oriented around the Railway series, and I never really make TV series characters. So why did it take me so long to make Railway series versions of all the characters? The reason is kind of funny looking back. As a kid living in Australia, I only had access to the Tomy engines, and on YouTube I would see people with the play-rail versions of the engines, and I really just fell in love with the white foot plates and the lining details that my engines didn't have. As a kid, I always wanted to get the main engines in their play-rail form, and over time I've been able to accomplish that. I mean, I have the ones I care about at least, like Henry, Gordon and James. I don't have a play-rail Percy, but that was never really one I was particularly eager to get. For the longest time, I could not let go that part of me that wanted all the engines with white foot plates. It felt like a betrayal to my kid self to make custom engines with black foot plates after all the time I'd spent trying to collect the play-rail ones. But eventually I decided that at the end of the day, I really like the Railway series aesthetic, and it was far better to have a cohesive, consistent aesthetic for my videos instead of having some engines with black foot plates and some with white. I'm really glad I bit the bullet and did this, because I really love my Railway series style engines. It feels great to have a consistent aesthetic to apply to all my videos, and I love the idea of remaking TV series stories and tweaking them to be in a RWS style, which is something I'm hoping to do more down the line. Before I committed to doing all the main characters in RWS style, I had only made Railway series versions for characters that I felt weren't done justice in their normal merchandise. For Toby, that involved extending his side plates and making him look more square and less rectangular. I even considered keeping his TV series livery when I extended his side tanks at the time. For Percy, it was using Charlie's chassis so that he's smaller than Thomas. For James, it was also about changing his length, using the slightly shorter redesigned play-rail body. Scale length and size has always been a bit of an obsession for me, and it's something that's remained really important when making all of my RWS versions. I'm really proud of the fact that I can line them all up in size order and they'll all be different sizes. I think each engine's size is integral to their character, especially the 3 big engines. Gordon is literally called the big engine, and it's constantly said that he's the biggest, so I extended his firebox and made him longer. Henry is described as smaller than Gordon but larger than James, so I used the redesigned play-rail James, which is slightly shorter than the regular James. Edward is already quite small, as is Toby. Duck and Thomas are a good length as well. Percy is titled the small engine, so I used a Trackmaster Charlie, the shortest powered engine, to accentuate that. The only thing now is that if I have made a Bill and Ben, they'd likely need to use these push-along engines, because they're the only thing that's really smaller than my Percy. Come to think of it, that's actually a pretty cool idea. James was the first engine that I started, way back in 2020. I'd planned on using the 2012 Trackmaster James, but I couldn't find any of them for a good price, so I got the redesigned play-rail James instead. They're pretty similar. What I like about these versions of James is that he's shorter than Gordon and Henry. The classic James is the same length. I much prefer when he's the same length as Edward. I think that encapsulates how he's a medium-sized mixed traffic engine, like how the hit era always seemed to pair Edward and James together. This custom was pretty straightforward. I cut down and filed the cab roof with my Dremel, filed down the sides of the roof as well, and extended his firebox with cardstock and smoothed it over with putty. I didn't like how short the firebox was on the merchandise, but honestly I probably made it too big in the end. You may be able to see on the merchandise each lining is uniform, they're equidistant from each other,
And I wanted to keep that, so I wanted to have the firebox go to this point where it would stay in this sort of even distances from each other. But that was ultimately not a good idea because it made the firebox way too big.
I undercoated him with Tamiya light grey undercoat, and I painted his body in Tamiya bright red. The footplate and underside of the boiler is matte black from the inexpensive Aussie export brand. As I mentioned in my previous video, I tend to use the cheap brand for matte black because I use a lot of matte black. For all my engines, I use matte black for the running board and a gloss black for the smoke box and the cab. In James's case, I didn't need to paint his smoke box because I was able to remove it. Painting him was a bit of a nightmare. Because the redesigned engines are just one chunk of plastic, I had to do all this masking to spray paint him. The old engines have separate pieces for the body and the footplate, so it's really easy to paint one red and black and the other piece green or red or blue or whatever colour the actual engine is. I hand painted his lining with Humbrol enamel gold paint for the boiler and Posca markers blue for the tender and splasher lining. I was pleased with how he turned out, but something felt just off. I didn't like how fat his boiler was, it made him look just as big as Gordon. Then I stumbled across this old work-in-progress photo of when he was all taped up and the smoke box was removed. I realised that this shape looked more like James than the actual completed custom, and that was because the boiler was too long. I needed to shorten the boiler so his extended running board was more pronounced. I figured that my ideal James combined the shorter length of the redesign but the smaller boiler diameter of the original. I made this Photoshop and decided to hack away at my James.
I completely cut away at the firebox and boiler of my original James, which left him looking like this. I sanded down all the rough edges, and from there I had to find a new boiler.
Fortuitously, an old broken Nerf gun that I had lying around had a cylindrical part that was almost the exact diameter of the original James boiler. So I cut it off and used it as the new boiler for James.
Because this new boiler sat a bit lower than the original, I had to fill in the top part of his cab with some cardstock and putty, and then that was smoothed over with sandpaper.
I was able to reuse a spare James's smoke box, which saved a lot of effort because I didn't need to scratch build a funnel or those other details. Because his new boiler was smaller, the AA battery could no longer fit inside him, so I had to reshape the metal so it could accommodate a AAA.
I also had to cut away a lot of the excess plastic that sits around the battery, so much so that you can see the gears turning when you turn it on, which is pretty cool.
I glued a bit of balsa wood to keep everything in place, and it actually works really well. He still runs well despite the AAA being a weaker battery. Like the first time around, I used cardstock to make the firebox. This time I was careful not to make the firebox too big. Again, I used paper clips for the handrails. For his lining, which kind of protrudes from the boiler, I use toilet paper roll.
I make a cut through the toilet paper roll with scissors, and then using a ruler and an X-Acto knife I cut out thin strips of the toilet paper roll, and that wraps around the boiler and can be stuck on with balsa wood glue. The reason why I don't just use regular cardstock is because it doesn't wrap around quite so well. It'll sort of have bumps or like little wrinkles in it because it doesn't curve smoothly around the boiler.
I also moved his dome to be on the lining instead of in between it. After lots of puttying and sanding, it was ready to paint. This time around I didn't need to add the matte black parts for the underside of the boiler because there was physically nothing there. The black parts that poke through are James's actual motor. All I had to do was repaint his red body, black footplate and the gold lining again. I didn't need to touch his tender since that didn't change from the first time around. Although I did add some lining on the back of the tender, which is something that I've added for all my tender engines for a little extra detail. I've also started adding numbers to the front buffer beam and builder's plates to all my engines. The number on the tender was taken from Google Images, and I photoshopped it to have a blue outline instead of a black one. His cab windows are made of masking tape. I sprayed it black, cut it into shape, and repainted the rims with the same paint I used for his lining. This is a great way to do cab windows or other decals that need to be stuck on. The windows are shaped a little differently to how they are in the book. I found that there wasn't much space above the firebox for windows, so I had them come down the sides. I actually quite like this look, even though it's not how he's typically depicted. As I mentioned in my Thomas video, all the numbers and builder's plates that I use are just printed on regular A4 paper and stuck on with a glue stick. The trick to making them look seamless is to get a paint pen and paint on the edge of the paper so that you can't see the teeny white strip on the edge of the paper. Recently I've done some similar modifications to my black Livery James. I shortened the boiler on that one and changed the position of the dome. This one's actually the same length as a regular Tommy James, so it's actually slightly longer than my Railway Series style James. By this point I realised the length of the footplate wasn't really the big issue. The bigger issue is actually just the length of the boiler, so I shortened the boiler on this one and did the same edits to the cab, so the cab's got a smaller cab roof and no lip on the cab roof. And I've repainted this one in a NATO grey, so it's not actually black, it's a really dark grey. That's sort of how he looks in the books, and I really like the sort of two-tone look of the black footplate and the black smoke box with the grey actual livery. So yeah, now he sort of matches my Railway Series style James, so if I was ever to do stories that involved James as he originally came to the island, then there will sort of be some consistency there. I know some people like to add the pony truck wheels on the front, but I decided not to. I personally find that it crowds the model too much. Trackmaster toys have very specific and simplified wheel arrangements, and I like keeping my customs similar to the toys. That's not to say I don't think you should do it or anything, it's just my personal preference for my models. I much prefer this version of James. It's not my favourite custom, but I think it holds up pretty well to the Photoshop concept that I made. He does seem a little small, especially next to Edward, but I think that's because his boiler sits so low. From the side you can tell they're the same size. I think James is even slightly longer. I also find that using the slightly larger face that comes with the remote control James helps him look a bit bigger. When I put on this custom angry face, which is from the smaller standard face, he looks smaller. It's interesting how the face changes the look of the model so much. So that's how I made my Railway Series style version of James. Do you like it? Do you think I did better the second time around? Which one would you like me to talk about next? Let me know, and in the meantime, have a good day.